On January 28, 2026, Microsoft reported earnings that beat Wall Street expectations, both revenue and profit, and the stock still collapsed 10% in a single trading day. That is not a bad day. That is a verdict. In roughly 8 hours of market trading, $357 billion in Microsoft market value simply ceased to exist. To put that in perspective, that is more than the entire market cap of companies like Netflix, Nike, and Goldman Sachs erased in one session. And here is what nobody is really saying out loud. The market already knew the earnings beat was coming. The 10% collapse was not a reaction to the numbers. It was a reaction to what the numbers finally confirmed. That after 3 years of historic AI bets, billion-dollar deals, and relentless Copilot branding, Microsoft is still searching for an answer to a very basic question. What exactly did they buy with all that money? By the end of this video, you will understand exactly how Microsoft got here, the deals that backfired, the products that flopped, the partners that drifted, and why $357 billion disappeared in a single afternoon. Go back to January 2023. Microsoft announces a massive investment in OpenAI, ultimately totaling $13 billion, and the financial press called it the deal of the decade. Every major tech outlet declared Satya Nadella had outmaneuvered Google, secured the future of AI, and changed the trajectory of Microsoft forever. What they did not explain is how the deal was actually structured. A significant chunk of that $13 billion was not cash. It was Azure credits, essentially vouchers that OpenAI could redeem to run its workloads in Microsoft's own data centers. Microsoft booked this arrangement as an investment, and then separately recorded the revenue when OpenAI spent those credits on Azure. They were essentially paying themselves and counting both sides of the ledger. Think of it like a landlord who pays the tenant's rent out of one pocket, then deposits it back into the other, and calls the whole thing a sound investment. On top of that, Microsoft structured the deal so it would collect 75% of OpenAI profits until the full $13 billion was recouped. Analysts at Morgan Stanley projected Microsoft would hit full recoupment sometime in 2026, if OpenAI was generating profits by then. Here is the problem. OpenAI lost roughly $11.5 billion in a single quarter in 2025. You cannot collect 75% of profits that do not exist. And because Microsoft accounts for its OpenAI stake using what is called the equity method, those losses show up directly on Microsoft books. In one quarter alone, Microsoft disclosed a $4 billion pre-tax hit from its OpenAI position, so instead of collecting profits on schedule, Microsoft is now absorbing losses every 3 months from the company it was supposed to be monetizing. But it gets worse. On January 21, 2025, Sam Altman stood at the White House alongside Oracle's Larry Ellison and SoftBank's Masayoshi Son to announce the Stargate project, a $500 billion AI infrastructure initiative. That same day, Microsoft quietly disclosed it had lost its status as OpenAI's exclusive cloud provider. That word, exclusive, had been the spine of the entire partnership. It was the reason the deal justified a $13 billion price tag. Without exclusivity, Microsoft was no longer the partner. It was just one option. And then the deals started stacking up. OpenAI signed a $300 billion deal with Oracle, a $22 billion deal with CoreWeave, then a $38 billion, 7-year agreement with Amazon Web Services. By the time the dust settled, Microsoft still held roughly 27% equity in OpenAI, but OpenAI had spread its infrastructure across 7 different vendors. Microsoft was capturing approximately 22% of where OpenAI money was actually flowing. They went from being the exclusive foundation of OpenAI's entire operation to being one line item on a vendor list, and one of the cheaper ones at that. The relationship that was supposed to define the AI era had been quietly shopped around to everyone, including Microsoft direct cloud competitors. Microsoft had a backup plan, and that backup plan was called Copilot. Microsoft has 440 million commercial Microsoft 365 subscribers. These are professionals who live inside Word, Excel, Teams, and Outlook every single day. Microsoft figured that if they embed AI directly into the tools people already rely on and charge an extra $30 per user per month to unlock it, even a fraction of adoption would generate enormous revenue. Only 2% of that subscriber base paid for it, as of Q2 of fiscal year 2026. Copilot had reached 15 million paid seats, but even among those, the active user activation rate sat at just 35.8%. A Gartner survey found that among organizations that had completed Copilot trials, only 5% were moving toward larger deployment. That is not a slow rollout. That is a rejection. To understand why, you have to look at the product decisions themselves. In 2024, Microsoft announced a flagship feature called Recall at their developer conference. The concept was that Recall would take a screenshot of your screen every few seconds, run it through AI, and let you search through anything you had ever done on your computer. Microsoft called it a perfect memory. Security researchers called it a keylogger built directly into the operating system. Even worse, all those screenshots were stored in a local database that was unencrypted by default. A developer built a tool that could extract every single screenshot from that database within days of the announcement. Microsoft pulled the feature before it shipped, delayed it a full year, added encryption, and still had to patch security vulnerabilities after it finally launched in April 2025. By early 2026, fewer than 10% of Windows 11 PCs could even run it. Then there was something researchers called the Echo Leak, a zero-click prompt injection exploit discovered in Copilot in June 2025. A single email could silently pull data from your SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams through Copilot AI context with zero interaction required from the user. Microsoft patched it, but security researchers pointed out the underlying attack method had been publicly documented for over a year before the exploit was found running in production. Meanwhile, Microsoft kept pushing Copilot into corners of Windows where users never asked for it. A button in Notepad, AI suggestions in Photos, a prompt in File Explorer, a dedicated hardware key on new keyboards. Every update added a new place where Copilot would pop up and offer to help with something users were already doing just fine on their own. Microsoft's own Windows lead eventually acknowledged publicly that the operating system had gone off track. That aggressive AI expansion was happening while basic stability issues went unfixed. In March at 2026, TechCrunch reported that Microsoft was actually rolling back Copilot integrations across Windows. The executive who announced the rollback said the new goal was to integrate AI where it is most meaningful, which is a careful way of admitting they had been integrating it everywhere it was not. The numbers on user trust were damning. A Net Promoter Score tracking Copilot accuracy dropped from -3.5 to -24 in just 2 months in late 2025. Among users who had stopped using Copilot after trying it, 44% said distrust of the answers was the primary reason they stopped. In June 2025, the Better Business Bureau's National Advertising Division ruled that Microsoft's Copilot branding was misleading, citing unsupported productivity claims in its marketing. And then an internal comment from a senior Microsoft executive leaked. In it, they described most of their Copilot products as gimmicky. Another insider went further, saying there is a delusion on the marketing side where literally everything has been renamed to have Copilot in it. By that point, Microsoft had approximately 80 distinct products with the word Copilot somewhere in the name. Search was supposed to be the first clean win. Bing Chat launched in February 2023, and Satya Nadella told The Verge he wanted to make Google dance. 3 years later, Google holds 90% of global search share. Bing sits at 4.3%. A decade of investment and $13 billion in AI spending moved Bing's market share by roughly 1 percentage point. In mobile AI, Google's Gemini crossed 750 million monthly active users. Apple chose Gemini as the foundation for a rebuilt Siri, deployed across 2 billion devices in a deal reportedly worth around $1 billion annually. Microsoft is nowhere in this picture. They have no mobile operating system, no consumer social network, no meaningful browser share. Their only significant consumer-facing product is Windows, and we have just covered how that is going. In developer tools, a competitor called Cursor hit $2 billion in annual revenue by early 2026. According to industry analysis, Anthropic now captures 54% of the coding AI market. OpenAI holds about 21%. GitHub Copilot sits somewhere in what is left. And then there is the talent story, which rarely gets covered, but matters a great deal. In 2024, Microsoft paid $650 million to bring in Mustafa Suleyman, co-founder of DeepMind and former CEO of Inflection AI, to lead their in-house AI development. 2 years later, Suleyman himself acknowledged in a public forum that his team's models would need another year or two to reach frontier capability. While that was playing out, 3 of the people most responsible for building Microsoft's AI ambitions quietly walked out. The architect of Bing Chat left for Shopify. The president of Azure AI left for Anthropic, one of Microsoft's primary competitors. And the lead researcher behind the Phi model series left for OpenAI. By March 2026, Microsoft had narrowed Suleyman's role and brought in a new executive specifically to take over the Copilot product. When you hire a high-profile external leader and then restructure around him within 2 years, that is not a pivot. That is an acknowledgement that something fundamental was not working. What $357 billion really means. Here is the thing about that January 28th stock collapse. It was not caused by any single piece of bad news. No executive resigned, no product was recalled, no legal ruling came down. The earnings actually beat expectations on paper. What happened was that investors, for the first time all at once, added up everything we have just walked through. They looked at record capital expenditure of $37.5 billion in a single quarter. They looked at cloud growth that was already decelerating. They looked at Copilot adoption numbers that were nowhere near the revenue thesis. And they looked at an OpenAI partnership that had quietly shifted from exclusive anchor to shared vendor. And then they sold. The $357 billion that disappeared was not lost to a scandal or a lawsuit. It was lost to the gradual accumulation of strategic decisions that looked bold in the press release and brittle in practice. Microsoft invested $13 billion, lost board influence as OpenAI restructured, lost cloud exclusivity to the Stargate coalition, lost the consumer market through security missteps and forced AI integration, lost the developer market to Cursor and Anthropic, and is still absorbing losses every quarter from the very company it funded. They built a product that 98% of their existing customers declined to buy. They pushed AI into every layer of their operating system until their own leadership admitted it had gone too far. And when the market finally priced all of that together in one session, it wiped out $357 billion. Microsoft's challenge was never whether they could spend on AI. No one doubted that. The question was whether spending alone would be enough. And right now, with the stock still sitting roughly 22% below its 52-week high as of late April 2026, the market's answer remains pretty clear. If you made it this far, you probably already sensed something was off with the Microsoft AI story a while back. Most people did. What makes this case worth studying is not the failure itself. Big companies stumble all the time. It is the pattern, the overconfidence in a single partnership, the product decisions driven by spending justification rather than user demand, the branding that ran years ahead of the actual product. These are not mistakes unique to Microsoft. They are mistakes every company chasing a once-in-a-generation technology wave eventually makes. $357 billion is just what it costs to make them at this scale. If you found this useful, hit subscribe. There is a lot more where this came from.